Back in 2005, I worked at Disney World in Orlando, Florida. I was a custodian, which is just a fancy word for janitor. We mostly worked when the park was closed, cleaning up, emptying trash, and treating all the water features with cleaning chemicals to keep them from getting smelly. There was also some guest interaction, like giving directions, helping guests plan their day, and answering their questions. So, my job was 70% janitor and 30% walking information point. There were major perks, but there were huge downsides too. One day, in September 2005, I was working a morning shift. The park opened at 10 a.m., so we spent the first few hours cleaning, testing rides, and making sure the park was ready for the day. That morning, I was helping out in Tomorrowland. I saw Jack, a cheerful guy in his 50s, up on the platform for the Skyway in Fantasyland. Jack was sweeping and whistling to himself, always in a good mood. As I walked towards Tomorrowland, I heard the sound of the Skyway starting up. The gondolas began moving along the track. I realized something was wrong. It was a Sunday morning, and I was tired and slightly hungover from the night before. It took me a moment to realize what was happening. The gondolas were moving fast, and Jack was still up on the platform. Someone had turned on the Skyway without checking if it was clear. I started running back towards the platform, hoping to catch up with Jack before the gondolas reached him. I was running as fast as I could, but I couldn't close the distance in time. Jack was still whistling with his back to the gondolas, not seeing them approaching. I shouted to warn him, but it was too late. The gondola reached him, and he grabbed onto it, trying to pull himself inside to stop from falling. Jack dangled from the gondola, 50 feet above the ground. I shouted, "Hang on, Jack. Just hang on." But there was nothing I could do. I watched helplessly as he struggled to hold on. The gondola passed over flower beds instead of concrete, and I shouted, "Jump, Jack. Jump to the flower beds." Jack let go and fell 50 feet, landing with a thump in the flower beds below. Watching him fall felt like slow motion. When I reached him, Jack wasn't moving. He lay among the flowers, wheezing and groaning in agony. I saw him spit up blood. I ran to get help, in tears, begging another cast member to call 911. The emergency services arrived quickly and took Jack to the hospital. He was in a coma, hanging between life and death. For weeks, Jack lingered in that state. We visited him, hoping for a sign of recovery. One night, the nurses reported strange activity on Jack's monitors. His heart rate spiked, and he seemed to whisper incoherently. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and the staff couldn't understand what was happening. The next morning, the hospital room felt cold and eerie. Jack's face was twisted in a grimace, his eyes moving rapidly as if in a nightmare. That night, I had a nightmare too. I saw Jack on the Skyway platform, his eyes hollow and lifeless, calling out to me, "Why didn't you save me?" When we returned to work, we found out Jack had passed away during the night. The official cause was complications from his injuries, but those who were there during his final hours believed something else. They said he seemed to be fighting against something unseen. Jack's death left a haunting scar on all of us. The park never felt the same. Whispers of strange occurrences spread among the staff. Some claimed to see Jack's figure late at night, still sweeping, still trapped in that moment of terror. Others heard his desperate whispers on the wind, begging for help that would never come. One night, while cleaning near the Skyway platform, I thought I heard someone whistling. My heart raced as I looked around, but I saw no one. The whistling grew louder, and I felt a cold breeze on my neck. I turned and saw a shadowy figure sweeping the platform. It was Jack. I froze in fear as his ghostly figure turned towards me, his eyes filled with sadness and anger. "Why didn't you save me?" Jack's voice echoed through the night. I stumbled back, tripping over a trash can. The figure vanished, but the whistling continued. I ran to find my coworkers, but when we returned, there was nothing there. They didn't believe me, but I knew what I saw. Jack's ghost became a regular sighting for those working late at night. Some reported seeing him sweeping, others heard his whistling, and a few even claimed to hear his desperate pleas for help. The flower beds where he fell were replaced with concrete, and a small plaque was placed in his memory, but his spirit never seemed to find peace. One night, I decided to stay late and see if I could talk to Jack's ghost. I waited near the Skyway platform, my heart pounding in my chest. The air grew colder, and I heard the familiar whistling. Jack's ghost appeared, sweeping the platform. "Jack," I called out, my voice shaking. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." The ghostly figure stopped sweeping and turned to face me. "You couldn't save me," he said, his voice echoing. "But you can help me find peace." "How?" I asked, desperate to help. "Find the person who turned on the Skyway," Jack said. "Make them understand what they did." I nodded, determined to help Jack. Over the next few weeks, I investigated the accident, talking to co-workers and looking through records. I finally found out who had turned on the Skyway that day. It was a new employee, unaware of the safety checks required. I confronted the employee, explaining what had happened and how their mistake had cost Jack his life. They were devastated, and together we held a small memorial for Jack at the park. As we stood by the Skyway platform, we felt a cold breeze, and Jack's ghost appeared one last time. "Thank you," he whispered, his figure fading. "I can rest now." Jack's ghost was never seen again, but the memory of that tragic day stayed with all of us. We made sure to follow safety protocols strictly, never wanting to repeat the same mistake. Rest in peace, Jack Miller. We love you and miss you every day, haunted by the memory of your final moments and the ghostly echoes you left behind. I always loved Disneyland. The magic, the joy, the escape from reality, it was my favorite place in the world. When I received an unexpected invitation for an exclusive after-hours tour, I couldn't believe my luck. Little did I know, that night would turn my dreamland into a nightmare. The park was eerily quiet as I walked through the gates. The usual hum of laughter and excitement was replaced by an unsettling stillness. My guide, a tall, gaunt man named Mr. Blackwood, greeted me with a forced smile. "Welcome," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "Tonight, you will see Disneyland like never before." We started our tour at Sleeping Beauty's castle. The illuminated turrets were breathtaking, but something felt off. Shadows seemed to move independently of their sources, flickering and dancing at the corner of my eye. I shook off the unease and followed Mr. Blackwood deeper into the park. As we walked through Main Street, I noticed the storefronts were dark, their windows cracked and smeared with dirt. A cold wind whipped through the empty street, carrying whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. I shivered and pulled my jacket tighter. "Are we the only ones here?" I asked, my voice wavering. Mr. Blackwood didn't answer. He led me towards the haunted mansion, quickening his pace. The mansion loomed ahead, its windows dark and lifeless. The gates creaked open as we approached, and a chill ran down my spine. Inside, the air was thick and musty. Cobwebs clung to every surface, and the faint smell of decay filled the room. Mr. Blackwood guided me to the stretching room. As the portraits elongated, revealing their hidden secrets, I heard faint, sinister laughter echoing through the walls. "This place has a history," Mr. Blackwood whispered. "A history of lost souls and restless spirits." Suddenly, the room went pitch black. Panic surged through me as I felt an icy hand brush against my arm. I stumbled back, trying to find an exit, but the walls seemed to close in around me. Then, just as abruptly, the light returned. Mr. Blackwood was gone. I was alone. I hurried out of the stretching room, my heart pounding. The mansion seemed to twist and shift around me, each corridor leading to another, more twisted version of the one before. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud, and the shadows seemed to close in tighter with every step. Finally, I burst through a door into the graveyard. Fog rolled over the tombstones, and the statues seemed to watch me with hollow eyes. I could hear whispers again, louder this time, forming words that chilled my blood. "Join us, stay forever." A figure emerged from the mist. It was a young girl, her dress tattered, her eyes hollow. She reached out to me, her voice a haunting whisper. "Help me. I'm lost." I took a step back, fear paralyzing me. Before I could react, she vanished, leaving only a cold spot where she had stood. Desperate to escape, I ran towards the exit, but the park had transformed into a nightmarish maze. Rides that were once familiar now appeared twisted and grotesque. The cheerful music was replaced by a dissonant, eerie tune that seemed to seep into my bones. As I passed the It's a Small World ride, the animatronic children turned to watch me, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They began to sing, their voices warped and haunting. It's a world of horror, a world of fears, it's a world of darkness, a world of tears. I stumbled away, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The park seemed alive, feeding off my fear. Everywhere I turned, I saw faces twisted in agony, eyes pleading for release. Finally, I reached the entrance. The gates were closed, but beyond them, I could see the world outside, normal and safe. I pushed against the gates, but they wouldn't budge. Panic consumed me as I heard footsteps approaching from behind. I turned to see Mr. Blackwood, his eyes now dark and soulless. He smiled a chilling grin. "You can't leave," he said, his voice echoing with malevolence. "You're part of the park now." The gates slammed shut with a deafening clang. I felt a force pull me back, and the world around me dissolved into darkness. The last thing I heard was the haunting laughter of the spirits, welcoming me to my new eternal home. Disneyland had become my prison, a place where nightmares come to life, and I was its newest resident, lost forever in the shadows of the happiest place on earth. But I was unaware that it was getting worse after it. As the darkness enveloped me, I found myself back inside the mansion. The walls seemed closer, the air thicker. My heart raced as I tried to find a way out. Suddenly, I heard footsteps echoing through the hallways. Not Mr. Blackwood's, but lighter, almost playful. I followed the sound, and it led me to the ballroom. The grand room was filled with ghostly figures dancing to a slow, haunting waltz. Their faces were blank, their movements mechanical. I stood frozen at the entrance, afraid to step inside but unable to turn away. One of the ghostly figures turned to look at me. Her face was familiar, it was the young girl from the graveyard. She reached out her hand, beckoning me to join the dance. Against my better judgment, I stepped forward. As soon as I entered the room, the atmosphere changed. The temperature dropped, and the music grew louder, more frantic. The ghostly dancers closed in around me, their cold hands grabbing mine. They spun me around, faster and faster, until I felt dizzy and disoriented. Their hollow eyes stared into mine, and I felt their despair, their longing to be free. "Help us," they whispered in unison. "You must break the curse." I didn't know how, but I knew I had to try. I broke free from their grasp and ran out of the ballroom, searching for a way to end their torment. The hallways twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the mansion. I came across a hidden door, slightly ajar. Inside, I found a small room filled with old, dusty books and strange artifacts. One book caught my eye. It was bound in dark leather and had a lock on it. The key was on the table beside it. I unlocked the book and opened it, revealing pages filled with strange symbols and incantations. One passage stood out, describing a ritual to break the curse that bound the spirits to the mansion. I gathered the necessary items from the room and hurried back to the ballroom. The ghostly figures were still dancing, their movements growing more erratic. I placed the items in the center of the room and began to chant the incantation from the book. The air around me grew colder, and the ghost's whispers grew louder. As I finished the ritual, a blinding light filled the room. The ghostly figures stopped dancing and looked at me with grateful eyes. One by one, they began to fade, their forms dissolving into the light. The young girl appeared before me, her face now peaceful. "Thank you," she whispered. "We are free." The light faded, and I found myself alone in the empty ballroom. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a sense of peace. I knew the spirits were finally at rest. Relieved, I made my way back through the mansion, heading for the exit. As I reached the front door, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Leaving so soon?" I turned to see Mr. Blackwood, his eyes no longer dark and soulless, but filled with rage. "You think you can just leave?" he hissed. "The park is still mine." I realized then that Mr. Blackwood was not just a guide, but the one who had cursed the spirits. He lunged at me, and I barely dodged his grasp. I ran through the hallways, searching for an escape. The mansion twisted around me, making it hard to find my way out. I finally reached the entrance, but the gates were still closed. Desperate, I remembered the book I had found. There must be a way to defeat Mr. Blackwood and break his hold on the park. I ran back to the hidden room and grabbed the book. Flipping through the pages, I found a spell to banish dark spirits. I needed to perform the ritual in the mansion's heart, the ballroom. I hurried back, Mr. Blackwood's footsteps echoing behind me. I set up the ritual items in the ballroom and began to chant. Mr. Blackwood appeared, his face twisted in fury. "You cannot defeat me," he roared, lunging at me. But I stood my ground, chanting louder. A light began to fill the room, and Mr. Blackwood screamed in pain. His form began to dissolve, and he tried to reach me, but the light was too strong. With one final scream, he vanished, the light consuming him. The mansion seemed to sigh with relief. The air grew warm, and the oppressive feeling lifted. I knew the curse was broken. I made my way to the gates, and this time, they opened. I stepped outside into the normal, safe world. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the park. I had survived the night. Liking these true tales of terror? Let me know in the comments and stay safe from the creeps out there. Story 3. A few springs ago, my spouse Linda and I decided to take our kids, Sam and Lily, to California for a week so they could finally visit Disneyland. It was a win-win. They'd stop pestering us about going, and we could enjoy some warm weather and sunshine for a whole 7 days, escaping the dreary rain of Seattle. We planned to spend 3 days at Disneyland, with a day on either side for more grown-up activities. We were exploring downtown Los Angeles, seeing the sights and soaking up the sun. I had just gotten my hands on a massive, delicious burrito I'd been craving. Linda was keeping the kids in line while I trailed behind, trying not to pass out from the food coma induced by my gluttonous indulgence. At one point, Linda needed to use the restroom, so I was put in charge of watching the kids. She went off to find a place that would let her use the facilities without a fuss. Admittedly, this is where I fell short as a dad. I found a bench, plopped myself down, and told the kids to stay where I could see them. Then, like the lazy lizard I was, I shut my eyes and started to doze off in the sun. Suddenly, I jerked awake, my fatherly instincts kicking in. I looked around and saw Sam halfway down the street, talking to a guy dressed as Mickey Mouse. I knew Disney characters occasionally ventured outside the park, but this far into the city was odd. But it was relieving since they hadn't vanished into thin air. I hurried toward Sam and Mickey, feeling more confused than anything. As I got closer, I noticed something wasn't right. The Mickey at Disneyland were always lively, with exaggerated movements. This one was eerily still. While Sam and Lily danced around him, Mickey just stood there, staring at them. Something about this Mickey felt off. His costume was filthy, covered in dirt and stains. It looked and probably smelled disgusting. I figured the guy in the suit was just trying to make a living. No one in a stable situation would wear a gross Mickey Mouse suit and wander around downtown LA. So, as the kids played, I reached into my wallet to give the guy a $20 bill. But instead of taking it, Mickey just stared at me with those big lifeless eyes. It was unnerving. I pushed the $20 toward him, but he tilted his head in a creepy, robotic way. I quickly put the money back in my wallet, not wanting to offend him further. I called the kids back, but they protested, wanting to play with Mickey some more. Mickey just kept staring at them, which made me increasingly uneasy. I insisted in my stern dad voice that they come back, and as they did, Mickey reached out to grab Sam. That crossed a line. No one touches my kids without permission. I stepped up and told the guy he had no right to touch them. Mickey just stared at me in silence. I grabbed both kids by the hand and walked away, explaining that no adult is allowed to touch them without their consent, especially strangers. That night, I couldn't sleep. The motel's air conditioning had chosen that night to break down. I ended up sitting at the small table in our kitchenette, sipping a glass of lukewarm water, trying to cool down. Our bungalow-style motel faced a quiet side street, and I walked to the window to take one last look at the LA night before trying to sleep. Then I saw it, standing still as a statue under the streetlight, a silhouette of Mickey Mouse. My heart skipped a beat. How had this guy found us? I had no idea, but there he was. I rushed to the kitchenette, grabbed a knife, and went back to the window. The Mickey shape was gone, but the costume lay in the middle of the parking lot, empty. I was scanning the lot, trying to see where the guy had gone, when suddenly he appeared right in front of the window and slammed his head against the glass. I screamed, waking Linda and the kids. I told Linda to lock herself and the kids in the bedroom and call the police. The guy kept slamming his head and fists against the glass, trying to get in. I waved the knife, shouting that the cops were on their way. The banging stopped as suddenly as it started. I looked out and saw the Mickey costume was gone. Blue and red lights flashed as the police arrived. I told them everything, but they found nothing, no sign of the guy, no leads. We left the next day, flying back to Seattle, but the memory of that night haunted me. Scared yet? Subscribe and get more stories that'll keep you on edge.